Good afternoon, everyone. Well, Gail asked me to moderate a panel on the dawning future, and I said, that sounds like a great idea. Let's bring in some of the most innovative people in the UUA and some people who are friends of mine and people I've worked with, and have them talk about what they're doing and the future. And so here we are this afternoon. Thanks for coming. The world is changing. The world is changing rapidly. The social movements out there right now are confronting existential questions. Whose lives matter? Who will be saved? That oldest religious question, who will be saved if there is in fact an ecological catastrophe? Who will be saved? Who will be spared? All of the relations that existed for millennia around gender, sexuality, all of that changing. So when we come together to talk about the future of the church, we're not just talking about the future of the church, we're talking about the future of everything and what the future of the church is role in that. The question for us is, we have had here 150 years of experience in being liberal religion in this place, and we are part of a tradition that has 400 years of being liberal religion in the United States, and a tradition that goes back much farther than that, for millennia. What is it that we have learned? What has been revealed to us by our experience that is going to be essential and useful and life-saving for the world as it goes through these changes ahead? What is it that we have learned that is useful knowledge for everyone? And then, how do we organize ourselves into an institution that can make that knowledge effective and real in the world? So we brought together these people to answer those questions, and let us hew out of a mountain of despair a small stone of hope. Let us hew out of a mountain of uncertainty a small stone of knowledge that we can use. A little glimmer of truth that we know. So you have their bios there. I'm not going to. You have everybody have the sheet with the bio, right? You can match the names and the faces, right? They're all wonderful people. I'm going to ask my first question to. Oh, wow, yes. Let's get a little light on the subject here. Oh, yes. See, everybody.
Good afternoon. I'm Gail Geisenhainer, Senior Minister here. Delighted that you all are joining us for this event. Thank you for being here. Our chalice lighter, Sue Phillips, is modeling for us among the many demands of the future will be to be ready to be called upon for a leadership role with no notice and no anticipation, and to be able to simply say, yes, I will attend. Thank you for that. The chalice cup with the flame is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. We join our hearts and our minds in the promises, the covenants of being Unitarian Universalists together each time we light the chalice. What I ask of us today as we light the chalice is to think in your own mind what words come to you when we think about lighting the chalice. Are there words that you have memorized, or words that you wish we would say, or maybe don't have words yet for that, or not quite sure? Just hold that for a minute. And if you would, join with me in just a few seconds of silence as we face the chalice, to recognize with me that the future will write its own words for the lighting of our chalice. For many of us, those words will not be the ones that we hold familiar and dear. The future will write its own words for the chalice if we are indeed deeply fortunate. Would you hold silence with me for just a moment that we might beckon those as yet unarticulated words? And may it be so that the light in our hearts and the light in our chalice and the roaring flame available when we gather beckon and call to the dawning future. May it be so. Thank you, John.
My first question for $500. And a chance to go on. Meg Riley. This is Meg Riley here at the end. As senior minister of the Church of the Larger Fellowship, you have greatly expanded your online ministries. What do you do online successfully, and what is not done so successfully?
Thank you. Everybody hear me okay? Great to be in Michigan. Just help me for a minute. How many of you are from the Ann Arbor congregation? And how many of you are for somewhere else? And where else? Will you shout it out? Lansing. All right. Okay, that just helps me. It's so exciting for me to get to see real people. I want to know everything about you. I'm usually looking into a camera when I speak. The Church of the Larger Fellowship started in World War II to reach out to soldiers and has since used every technology possible to reach all kinds of people. We are the largest UU congregation, including 600 members who are incarcerated, for whom everything is done with paper and pen and typewriter. And maybe some of you are pen pals, I hope. But we have also, since I came almost 5 years ago, really used the internet in every way that we can to explore. And I'll just name that Gail Geisenhainer was on the board that called me to the CLF almost 5 years ago in the tiny world that we all live in. So what's going on in communication is a revolution that's been compared to the invention of the printing press in size. If you look at social movements all over the world, including in the US, social media is why things get attention that the authorities maybe don't think are worthy of attention. And so this is our chance, in my opinion. We who will never be Mormons and go door to door suddenly have the opportunity to reach out to hundreds of thousands of people who are shown in study after study to resonate with our values. So that's what we've been trying, and we've really been trying many, many things. To do this involves a spirit of experimentation. And it involves a willingness to fail. As Tom said, not everything that we've done has worked well. For instance, right now, our online worship platform makes me want to scream and hide because the platform we were using quit existing the way we were using it, and we switched. And the one that we have, we can see by our analytics, isn't working. And there's nothing to do but live through it until we can figure out what else to do. And that is the nature of this work, is that you try something, you can see exactly when people leave. You don't have to wonder if their minds are wandering. They click off. You know for a fact when they go. And so, that is the kind of resilience that you have to develop in order to do this work. And I think one of the things that can work against us is our desire to not go out until we've got it all just right. Because in this world, we never will. Just when you get it right, the platform you used is going to quit existing, right? And so it's got to be a spirit of experimentation, adaptation, and willingness to fail, sometimes very publicly, and to just say, well, that's the nature of it. I think that it takes courage to do that, and it takes some boldness. And so when I read the history of this congregation, and I didn't read the history of Lansing, but I'm sure it's there too, because it's in our nature to be bold. And so I invite you to that kind of courage and commitment. And what we need to do is start right where we are. I would say, and when Tom wrote this very positive, glowing thing about, using the internet to reach out, and I added, and it was late February in Minnesota at the time, I added, it can also be like trout starvation, where trout fisher people had all they wanted to eat, but they died of starvation because it was the same minerals and vitamins over and over. And the internet can get very thin in late February in Minnesota, and I bet in Michigan too. It is not enough. It's got to be both and. And you guys here who have the bricks and mortar stuff, you are also going to die of trout starvation if you don't do both and. Everybody has to be doing both and. So you need to start where you are. I was looking at the Ann Arbor website. You have really cool stuff to reach out with. You have this day of playing games. How are you telling the world about that? How are you reaching out? And it's got to not just be a Facebook page where you're just having announcements. How are you actually engaging? That's the revolution. I would say where we succeed is in building engagement, is in actually connecting with people where they are, so that when we start a worship service, everybody wherever they are says the chalice is lit, and they name the place where they are. So we can see this global community, and they can feel like they're part of something. So you who have this amazing place that you're already part of, what are you doing to not die of trout starvation here? Because you will too. It may feel different than it does online, but there are so many tools, so many of them are virtually free to use. So I would say you need some people who are willing to do it, and you need to authorize them to fail. Yes, you need to authorize failure in this congregation and in any congregation that's going to do that. And that is so hard when we just want that quality and that real, everything to be just right. So you can actually kind of start to have a lot of fun with it when you begin to expect that kind of failure. Tom is part every week of this little show we do called The View, spelled V-U-U. Just for fun, we get online and we use a platform that fails us constantly, that humiliates us each and every week, called Google on the Air. It's free. You can broadcast live on YouTube. But hundreds of people either listen to podcasts or watch that. Hundreds of people are willing to put up with the imperfection because they want the connection. And I want to say that connection is the success. That is the solid gold. When somebody is not alone anymore because they found a community. Just the way you felt when you walked in the door and could relax in your congregation, that's how people feel online. So that, to me, is the gold standard of success. Not the analytics, not the flashy viral stuff, but the sense that somebody says, now I can make it through the week. Now I'm going to be okay. Now I know that other people care about me. Thank you.
Meg is right that View show is a little entertaining show. There's 6 of us that get on with a guest, and we goof around and gossip and make jokes and talk about some serious stuff in between a lot of other things. But it's great fun. And thanks, Meg, for making me a TV star.
You have a great face for a podcast.
I have a great face for... Moving on. The thing about these internet connections is that in the end we're talking about religious transformation, conversion, and people making a commitment and feeling themselves taken by a commitment. So I wanted to ask Tandi to tell a story about how she came to Unitarian Universalism. You all know Tandi?
Hi. And I love to, I don't pass up a chance to say Meg's one of my ministers. Because I'm also, apart from being a member of my home congregation in Tacoma, Washington, where I'm an affiliated minister there, I'm also a member of Church of the Larger Fellowship. And I'm grateful to online ministries because I often, before I go to my brick and mortar congregation, I'll be worshiping with Tulsa or Bloomington or other congregations who are online, and I'm really grateful for that. So I was raised in a small farming community in Ohio. Don't hold it against me. I am a Buckeye. I'm coming out. And my family belonged to the same congregational church that they have for generations. And while it was liberal in polity, it was quite conservative in theology. And so when I went away to Bowling Green State University and rubbed up against different people, my mind was blown. It was pretty awesome. And I was in the honors college within this large state university, and there was a group of us in the honors college that were put off by the intellectual bullying that sometimes went on in class, the one-upsmanship, the I know more than you do kind of thing. But there was this beautiful value that was instilled in our cohort, and that was, and I'm not sure I agree with this, but you're the really smart people, and you're gonna be taking over the world, so you better be responsible. And that really stuck with some of us. And we thought, well, intellectual bullying is not very responsible. And so instead, okay, we're going to be the ones taking over the world. What do we need to know? And so I became a history major because I wanted to learn history. And you know how important that is to know where you came from. And then I added psychology because it just seems like you're supposed to do that. And I wanted to learn what people, what they thought. And then I added sociology because then I got to lay the land. And what I came up with was it's religion that's going to save the world, but not one that was invented yet. So we would get together and we would light, a group of us, there was 8 of us, we would light a candle in the middle of a bowl, and we would sit in a circle and we would check in and talk about our spiritual yearnings and the meaning of life and what did we need from each other in order to more fully live into our vision of what was possible. And we made it clear that we were there as individuals, and we were also there to create something larger than ourselves. And not just in that moment of time, but we knew that we were going places, and we had pinky swears that we would walk this life together no matter where we landed. And we thought, we should write this stuff down. Like, we're going to have a dogma. We're going to have no creeds. We're going to have promises to each other and all this stuff. And then a professor who we really loved and trusted came to me and said, I heard you're the ring leader, and I almost said ring master, and that's probably true too. The ring leader, and I've got a van, and I'm going to meet you on Sunday morning at the student union, grab your cohorts, and I'm going to take you to church. And I'm like, I'm a little allergic to church. We've got our own thing going on. And she said, trust me. So she took me to this meeting group in crappy, acoustic, nasty chairs meeting room of this town hall, and a bunch of gray-haired people who didn't quite know what to do with us. And the hymnal, the brand new hymnal, we read the principles, and we read some of the hymns. We're like, oh my gosh, someone else figured this out. They even thought of stuff we hadn't thought of yet. This is awesome. Okay, so here's the thing. So the professor would meet at the student union the same time every Sunday. And there may have been times when maybe the night before we just couldn't get out of bed for some reason, and we didn't show up. She never shamed us. She never took it personally. She kept showing up. And the more she showed up, the more we showed up. Now, the funny thing about this little congregation, this meeting group, because now they're the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Maumee Valley. They have their own building and their own minister. They have no idea what they've done. My goal in life is to go back and preach there and say, guess who I am? And guess who some of the people are in those cohorts, because they went on to do amazing things. One of them is now he used to be the vice president of Chicago United Way. He's now the vice president of the National Safety Board. Another teaches at a university who's not Unitarian Universalist, but constantly sends his students there. So do you see what I'm saying? There was this little investment. They had no idea. And this is not a campus ministry like you've got campus ministry. This wasn't a campus ministry that was a big program, and it wasn't, I don't even think it was core to their mission. But it blew my mind because they showed up. They invited us into their homes for homemade meals and family dinners, and asked how we were doing. They asked what our majors were. The folks in this little crappy meeting room knew more about my studies than my own family did. And then sometimes they would come to campus and ask for tours of, somebody, one of our cohort is an artist, and when they had a gallery opening, practically the entire congregation showed up for the gallery opening just to see. And sometimes they'd take us out for pizza. And then during finals week, they gave us care packages with Jiffy Pop popcorn. Do you remember that when you shake it? Yeah. And little cartoons that they cut out of the newspaper. I have them somewhere in a box in my house. And the little inspirational quotes from our tradition. Just say, keep going. Now they knew, like I said, they knew when my finals were. My family did not. So when I left their congregation, the very first town I went to after I graduated, I looked for a Unitarian Universalist congregation before I looked for an apartment or a job. And I walked in, because I left a large extended family, and I knew as a young adult, I sure as hell should not raise myself by myself. And so I needed a place to practice being human. I needed to be at a place where I knew where there was a pinky swear that we're going to walk this life together. I needed to be in a place where we were creating something larger than ourselves, larger than this here and this now. The Tacoma chalice lighting is one of the most covenantal chalice lightings I've ever heard. And so I give this to you. We light this chalice in deep respect for the mystery and the holiness of life, in honor and gratitude for those who've gone before, whose shoulders I stand on, with love and compassion for those who walk with us on this journey, and with hope and faith for the generations to come. Then I always add, may my work, my ministry, make the way easier and more joyful and more love amplified for those yet to come. Okay? And that's why we come together, isn't it? Right? So what this congregation sprung forth, what I do, in your program I think I'm called the growth strategist, and how I craved the title of a minister of abundance and possibilities. Well, my title is even better than that. I'm still the growth strategist, but they added some stuff. And I am the UUAA Innovation and Network Specialist. Ooh. Isn't that awesome? And so what that means is I fan the flames of innovation. I think the three most holy words in the English language are I see you. And so a lot of my job, honestly, is watching for the innovators and say, you go, look at you go. And then connecting them with other innovators. Okay, and technology has let us do that. I came up with this model called innovative learning circles. And so what I do is I gather 7 innovators, 7 rock stars who might be, I gotta wrap it up. Okay, so I could talk about this forever till midnight. I'll wrap it up. Okay, thank you, Tom. So these innovators, I gather them together so that they can listen to each other's challenge stories and be vulnerable with them, with each other. And you can do this too. So if you're say your role is as a worship associate, get together with other worship associates and share what are the challenge stories and how does this service leadership bring you closer to our faith. And I'll talk more about multi-sites and planting congregations and stuff later.
Thank you, Tandi. Thank you, Tandi. Sue Phillips.
I got it. It's okay, babe.
Are we all set?
We're all set.
Jeez. Sue Phillips, you invented Faithify. Well, created, launched, got it started, helped it, pushed it out the door.
Yes.
Right. Tell us about
The
Faithify
midwife.
and tell us how we here in Ann Arbor can build on what you've learned about how and why people connect to UU Ministries.
Hi, everybody. What a pleasure to be here with you today. Greetings from Milton, Massachusetts, our congregation there where I'm a member. I bring you greetings from the 230 congregations of New England who are here in spirit. So how many of you, if you would raise your hands, how many of you have used Kickstarter or Kiva or Indiegogo or GoFundMe? Okay, how about Faithify? All right, we got some people in the house. Crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is a several-year-old way of connecting people across the kinds of obstacles that used to keep people from connecting at all, across geography, even ideology, family structure, and the like, to convene themselves around some sort of common purpose. Usually crowdfunding the primary purpose of crowdfunding is to raise money for people's projects. If you think about Kickstarter, which is kind of equity investment model, small business people or people who have a product to sell post their project online and presumably thusly make it available to the entire world of investors who then generously invest their money in the project, often get thrown some swag in the meantime. The notion of crowdfunding, to the extent that you've engaged it, we think it's all about making money. We think it's all about raising those dollars. And I want to say right from the start that Faithify had that goal. Faithify is the first ever denominationally affiliated crowdfunding platform. And by every measure of success, we've done well in the first 10 months. We've raised through the site over almost $250,000. We've had about 15,000 shares on social media of Faithify projects. There's been 62 projects to date. Something like 2,200 donations have flowed through the site. Some of you here offering many, many donations, I'm glad to say. Thanks, Don. About 73% of our projects are successful. They reach their goal, and 92% exceed their goal. So part of the reason I'm barraging you with these numbers, knowing they're hard to keep in your mind, is that we thought Faithify was going to be about the numbers. We thought there was an actual crowd in crowdfunding. It turns out it's not true, Don. There's no crowd. We figured if we built this fantastic UU branded, UU affiliated, UU value fueled site, that good UUs just like you would come flocking to the site and throw your money at projects. Now, how many of you have thrown your money at projects on Faithify? A few of you have. Fantastic. This is one of the lessons I think Faithify has to teach all of us about how people connect in the 21st century. The first thing is, if you build it, people do not necessarily come. Now, this almost feels like an egregious pastoral crisis I might create for people who have just spent so much time and energy literally building something so beautiful here. Your facilities are absolutely amazing. But one of the things we've learned about from Faithify is that the crowd does not just come. The crowd has to be attracted. And it turns out what drives people to our site is not altruism or deep institutional identity as Unitarian Universalists. They come because someone they care about, has invited them to come to the site and invest in a variety of ways in the projects. Someone they care about has invited them to express their care in a concrete way, and people respond. It turns out that the real crux of crowdfunding is activating your networks to invite people to participate in a one-off sort of way that may or may not create a long-term relationship. This is extreme. It's powerful to the tune of $250,000. Not bad for 10 months. So it's about the invitation, and it's about having a platform through which people can pass at their leisure to the extent that they're called, when they're called to engage according to their conscience and capacities. Another thing about Faithify that I think is deeply applicable for congregations looking to their future, as you are, is back to this idea of experimentation. Because we had no earthly reason to think Faithify was going to succeed before we pulled it off. In fact, we had reason to think that it might not. What a religious leader has, whatever business do I have, essentially what is a little bit like running a small tech company with other people's money. It does not feel better. You know this because you have a mortgage. It feels actually riskier to use other people's money. And we made a big stink about it at launch, believing that we had something to do, something that people would respond to, and then for like 3 days, crickets. And we were terrified. We were terrified. And what it turns out is that the crowd builds over time. So that now, 10 months in, we have something like, oh gosh, I wish I had the exact number right. Wait a second, I do. We have 7,000 people 7,000 times people have returned to the site. So we have 7,000 returning visitors. To me, and the let's see, from your perspective, the rate of people returning to the site is going up steeply. So this is another thing we have to learn from crowdfunding, is that the crowd builds through network connections. The crowd is not connected to each other. The crowd is connected to other people who are in the crowd. So I want to talk for just a second about, am I doing okay for time? I want to talk for a second, okay. Talk for a second about networks. So I want you to know that I know the Michigan fight song. I do. I will. Do you, Don? No, I do not. Yeah. I will not sing it. I will not sing it. I know the Michigan fight song, but I did not go to Michigan. But I know it, and I wear often a Michigan sweatshirt. The university did not teach me that song. My people did, because my brother and my sister went to Michigan. That is a network. I am connected to Michigan in ways that really literally fly their flag. I sing the ridiculous fight song, like in the shower. TMI. Yeah. Avoid references to showers and panel discussions in future. Note to self. So I'm using this kind of base example because that's how I am connected to Michigan. My wife, Tandi Rogers, her family is from Ohio State. This complicates matters just a tad bit. But I can be a part of her network too. And when I'm in Ohio, I wear an Ohio State sweatshirt. And when I'm in Michigan, I wear a Michigan sweatshirt. So why does this matter? What? Intercultural competency. Oh my Lord, you people. Seriously, this is it's huge. I could go on about that. So my point is that I do not have to be an alum of Michigan. I do not have to be in fact, I'm not an alum. I'm not a donor. I'm never going to give money to Michigan. I'm only going to come on campus when I'm invited here to speak to you. This is how people connect to congregations in the 21st century, and it's how people connect to Unitarian Universalism. This, I hope you'll take as a good news story, because I love my brother and sister. They have me walking around in a Michigan sweatshirt. People say, "Go blue" to me in the most obscure locations. I was literally in Nairobi, Kenya 2 years ago, and somebody was walking down the street and they said, "Go blue." This is the potential of a faith community that organizes itself to engage the power of networks and network connections. So I invite you to not be dismayed by the apparent challenges of technology. Faithify is a technological tool, but it signals a whole new way to help people connect to each other by being a platform, not to which people connect, but through which people connect. A major difference. So I invite you, this glorious, potential-filled congregation, to consider how people can connect through you, that you might use yourselves to be that vessel. Amen? Thank you.
Next up, Glen Thomas. Prepare. The question I have for you is, you talk about in your little essay, a congregation finding its voice. And I've heard you use that phrase many times. And I want you just to tell me what you mean by that. Because sometimes I think it's kind of mystic, but go ahead.
It is mystic, and it's designed to be so. I want to say first, just on a meta level, how honored I am to be breathing next to the people I am breathing next to. It is, I'm quite humbled by being at this table. And then second, I want to tell you a small story. Some of you know this story of mine. And it happened 8 years ago in this very room. It was one of the very first times I was here as director of music, and I was standing right about at this spot where this is. They had hired me as the interim director of music, and by them I mean you. Hired me as the interim director of music with the idea that it was asked in my interview, would it be okay with you if you were not eligible for the permanent position? And I said, yeah, because I had no idea who you people were. And I was moving here for grad school, but I was standing at this very spot, and Allison started playing the keys, and they started to sing a song that I had never heard before. Now, know that I was coming from a church where most people looked like me, where most people made the amount of money or less than I did, where most people were technically less educated than I was. And so I had chosen to come to this place because it looked nothing like that church that had been gay bashing me for years, right? I decided to come here not knowing anything about you, and she started to play chords, and we started to sing verse after verse after verse, and we got to verse 5, which was, "We are gay and straight together, and we are singing for our lives. We are gay and straight together, and we're singing for our lives." It was a song I had never heard before, and I wondered how in the world you could sing those scandalous words. Now, I'm one of the lucky ones, because I have been able to make your mission my life's work for 8 years. I have been able to stand here and receive that gift from you. But it is a really, really, really small percentage of people who have a story anywhere like mine. And that's a real shame. The world of today doesn't need churches of people who all look like me. The world of today does not need all white churches. It does not need all educated churches. It does not need all rich churches. It does not need all poor churches. What it needs is churches who can demonstrate and live into the vision of building community across differences. We need churches that are not talking, whose voices are not all able-bodied, whose voices are not all cisgendered. We need voices that are communing rather than colliding. We need people to be able to sing. We need people to be able to speak with powerful voices to broken folks like me and change their lives with single songs, single verses of single songs. We've been talking for decades, centuries, about wanting to be a faith of action. We talk about being deeds, not creeds, honoring deeds, not creeds, honoring actions more than analysis, or at least at the same level as analysis. And yet, our worship is based on a system which has most of us sit silently while somebody else tells us about their theological reflections. We talk about wanting to be an embracing and widening community when the joke still holds from my childhood, that Sunday is the most segregated day of the week. Yes, we care. We care about people who are not like us, but where does that show up in our worship? And where does it show up in our living together as a community? We want to be bold. But a minority of us are actually practicing that in our worship. Why? We have a limited amount of voices being able to practice speaking in our worship hours. I think that's a travesty. I think it's outdated. I think we have to imagine worship in a completely different way if we are to be relevant to the church that is to the future that is approaching us. It is no longer enough for our worship to show leaders practicing theological reflection before us. We must find ways to gather communities together to practice it on their own. The church needs to radically shift the focus of worship to a default of embodiment and a source of action. It's no longer enough for our choirs to show us what beauty sounds like in the air. We must learn to create it for ourselves. We must learn to be able to use it in our homes. We must be able to use this in our own lives. And the only way we do that is to get from a position of reclining and listening and get deeper into the worship action ourselves. Amen. So, the world does not need congregations to listen to singing. The world needs congregations who know their own voice. The world needs a congregation that can display what it means to be a community. It needs people who are constantly challenging themselves to bring about a relevant message that will be relevant not only to the people who we know and who we like and who we understand. Our worship needs to be filled with the challenging possibility of growth, so that these halls are joyous and burgeoning voices from all walks of life. That is not easy, but it is necessary in a world where it is easier sometimes to get news about Syria than it is to get the news from around the corner. We need to learn and to display what it means to connect with worlds that we had never seen before or that we had never understood before. I'm committed to that work. I think it will challenge me, and I hope it will challenge each one of us. My hope is that our worship can become more full of action than listening, can become more full of hearing others and knowing the beauty that comes together when we put our voices with other voices and we use the gift of air to create beauty. There's hope in that. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, Don, how are religious institutions going to finance themselves into the future to follow the sublime with the
Just
mundane?
have Glen Thomas go out and talk a lot to people, and they'll just open their wallets up like crazy. Next. Wow, thank you. I'm the one humbled in your presence. I just want to bring my greetings and congratulations to you from the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association. I'm very fortunate to lead and serve over 1,800 ministers and seminarians around the world. And it's especially poignant for me to be here. I'm so grateful for the invitation because Gail and I were serving together on the executive committee of the UUMA many years ago when she was in the process of search for this congregation. And it's so wonderful when you live with someone during search and you see them fall in love and all the things that happen. And then you finally get to come, I didn't get to go to the wedding, but I'm kind of get to come to be here after a few years. And it's so fun to be with you all to see what's happened these many years. So my main gig is to be an executive director, but ever since I found Unitarian Universalism, I've been dabbling in stewardship and finance. And when I was in seminary, I started to teach a class called Financial Management for people who don't want to bother, because I was around these minister wannabes who had these big dreams about money, and they were like tens of thousands of dollars in debt. And even though they didn't believe in God, when I said, well, how are you going to make all that work? They said, well, God will provide. So it was my introduction to UUism. So I'm just going to give you three things. I better put my timer on because, like many of us up here, we can get pretty passionate and time is irrelevant for us. So let me just remind myself here. So three things, and as I thought about these three things, like they may not sound very innovative in some ways, but to be honest, if they happen, they would be extremely innovative. So the first thing we have to do to fund our religious community is to change the way we think, talk, and act about money. Pretty simple, right? I spent a lot of time the last couple days on your website, and of course I read your budget and everything else, financial core, your governance core values and those things. And so I read one of your core values about stewardship. And so it says, and it's very nice words, pursuing our ministries through prudent and creative use of our resources, physical, environmental, financial, and human. That's beautiful. My experience of being in congregations is that when it comes to finances, people are really good at being prudent. And the creative piece, maybe not so much. And I love the folks who serve in finance committees and stewardship committees. I really love them because their work's so fun. But you think about it, in some ways, I didn't even really dawn on me. I want to be prudent. I think the word prude has something to do with prudent, right? Which is really one of the things, it's so perfect because one of the things when I was counseling one of my first colleagues in seminary who was going on $80,000, $90,000 in seminary debt, and I was coaching and counseling her, and she was a lifelong UU. I said, well, tell me, like, what did you learn about money, and what did you do at the dinner table when you grew up? And she, and she was bisexual. She was very, very clear of her sexual identity. She said, we talked about sex all the time at the dinner table. We grew up UU. And I said, what about money? We never talked about money. So talking, thinking, acting different about money is really important. It's not, money's not drudgery, it's fun. There's a reason that it's like 4 stories in the Bible are about money. You read the Bible, I'm not a big Bible guy, I grew up without any religion, but it wasn't about, they didn't write the Bible to raise money. It was kind of before things. It wasn't like, here, let's use the Bible to raise money. It was stories about money because it's so intertwined with our life. Money and spirituality, somehow we said, well, we're not going to bring those two together. So we really have to change how we think and talk about money. The definition of insanity, just keep doing the same things over and over again, expect a different outcome. And that's kind of how we do pledge drives and all these things. If we just have a more inspirational speaker, we just do the same thing better. And that's not the way to go about funding our futures. Another one is a real simple one, think 10. So 10. So 10%, before I became a UU, my family, my wife and I had the biggest spiritual transformation we ever had in our life is we made the unbelievable commitment to become tithers. Give away 10% of our income, and we knew 10 was kind of magical, but we started we gave away 10% after we paid our budget, our mortgage, our food, and vacation. Then we gave 10% away. So it was like those $12 were really helpful. But that's how we began, and eventually, over a series of time, this is over 25 years ago, 10% of our gross income we give out to, and we've basically followed the liberal tithe of 5% to our congregation, 5% to God, good causes. So it's a really old concept that is not really something we talk about very much, and it changed my life. I wouldn't be a minister if we didn't start tithing. It completely changed so many things in my life that have nothing to do about generosity. 10%. When I served in congregations, I came in and candidating, we can say, my goal, my vision is to give away 10% of our income when I'm here. And the big congregation I went to, they had given away 2%, like I think you're about 4, what I could tell. They were giving away 2%, and they had a $30,000 deficit. And they say, I'm saying 5 years we'll give away 10%, and they laughed at me, right? And in 3 years we got to 9.6. So giving 10% is a real foundational thing. It's amazing how good congregations feel when they can say we give away 10%. The other piece is the 10%, and this is my new thing, is right after I took this job, I was the first executive director of the UUAA. I'm a rare person who's led a nonprofit the last 6 years whose budget has tripled. In 6 years. It's not really happened the last 6 years in many nonprofits. I'm very fortunate because of the great people I work with. But I was at a conference where 2 months into the job, and the first thing the lady who was coaching me, it was for people who used to be in parishes who are in kind of executive roles, and she said, okay, so tell me, in 3 to 5 years, how are you going to get 10% of income from non-members? It's the first thing she told me. It's like wow, light bulbs, right? And we're not there yet as a UUMA, but that question has just stuck with me. Every membership organization, whether it's the Elks Club, whether it's congregations, whether it's the UUMA, should be thinking and asking questions, where do we get 10% of our income, at least, from beyond our members? There, I knew that thing was going to go off. So that's something if you just start even asking that question, it's amazing what you can think of. And the last thing I'll just say is, I didn't know people were going to talk about boldness. Bold. When we started to think back in the days when we were on the executive committee, of taking this UUMA, which had one full-time staff, and it was kind of a sleepy little thing, people threw in $200 a year, that was the UUMA, and it was okay. But we said, let's do something bigger. And we used to have this mantra, bold times 10. And to go out in 2009 and ask people to raise their dues by 300, 400%, that's pretty bold by 10, right? Amazingly, they did it. And lots of amazing things have happened. And what I'd say is one of those things that'll be bold is, and this is the last thing I'll leave you with, and I could like all of us talk for hours here, is one of my favorite stories about what a congregation can do if they start thinking bold. Is this? How many of you know of a website called Headspace? Any of you know about Headspace? I didn't know about Headspace till I made the Twitter plunge. So here's the story of Headspace. You pay to be a member of Headspace, $100 a year. You have different ways you can pay. And what they do is they give you every tool, support they can for how to become a meditator, right? It's amazing the resources they have. And I found them because they hit 10,000 members, which meant they were getting at least $1 million in annual income, right? I thought, wow, how many of our congregations could have been a headspace? Because I served a congregation that had 3 different meditation groups, right? It's like people would come all over the community, but we don't think that way. We just don't think that way. And so be bold, think and talk differently, and it's amazing what can happen.
Thank you, Don, for your always energetic and inspiring words. Leslie, given all that we've heard and all the changes in the world, give us your prognosis as to whether or not you think UU congregations will even be here or be relevant in 10 years.
Thank you. It is a great honor to be here, and congratulations to each and every one of you for this amazing celebration and all that it's taken to get here in every sense. It is a little bit daunting to be the last person after so many esteemed folks, so I'm going to say this. One of the things about me is that I believe in paradoxical thinking. I believe always that there's probably rarely an either or that I agree with. There is almost always a both and. And so what I believe about the bottom line to that question, is there a future for our congregations, is this. Yes. If, and only if, they are places of deep connection and authenticity, if they're places where we can share our greatest joys, where we can be ardent, an old-fashioned word, even though that's countercultural and not cool, where we can be free to share our griefs as well and reveal those chipped parts of our hearts to one another, and most importantly, where we can together, in real time, offer resources that allow us to be reformed and transformed. So, both and. Maybe yes, and maybe no. So, in thinking about this, what I've really thought about a lot is, I think about this all the time. I think about it in the shower, just to mention the shower again on the panel, so you won't be the only one, Sue. I think about this all the time. What can save the faith that saved my life? Because I'm another one for whom this was a life-saving faith. And this is what I believe. I have done a lot of work in my career around multiculturalism. And I'm probably known, if I'm known for anything in this association, which is probably not much, but for my work around race and looking at our struggles with race as an association. But here's the thing. We face a challenge today that is about being multicultural in ways that are much greater than race. It's about being multicultural in every aspect of our being. My colleague, I also teach at Meadville Lombard, my colleague Mark Hicks likes to say that every encounter that you have is multicultural because there's something about that person's life experience that's different from yours. And so I think if we can come into this with an awareness of that, then we have the opportunity to be together, because I think we face every day that I minister in the congregation that I am privileged to serve, I realize that I minister to at least 2 congregations, and they are vastly different, and they want vastly different things. There are actually more, but it makes me feel a little better to think I'm, ministering to only 2 congregations at every moment. And one are the people who came in at a time when they really needed freedom, and the other congregation are the seekers that are coming in who really need something to hold on to and structure, and places for people to hold them in a world that offers them way too much freedom. So in that sense, that's what I think we need to do. And in the biggest sense of that, what I believe is that we have to concentrate on a couple things. Gratitude and trust. Gratitude and trust, being grateful for those who came before us, knowing our own history, knowing the mission of our faith, knowing that we are a faith that for whom people have died, as Tom referred, people have sacrificed so that we can be here. I once taught a UU history class, and a woman who had been raised Unitarian Universalist, birthright Unitarian Universalist, left the room in anger when I said that we grew out of the radical wing of Christianity. She did not believe that. She thought I was lying. She left. 60 years of being a UU, and that had never been presented to her before somehow. Anyway, we need to know where we come from, and we need to be grateful for it. We need to hold that as a trust. And we need to take that trust into our relationships with one another. We come from a heretical faith. That means we are people, the word heretic just means at its root to question. We are people who are questioners. But sometimes, folks, we just question way too much. And that creates a culture of being critics rather than a culture of covenant and care for one another and compassion. So we need to move into a culture of trust. And then we also, I believe, need to hold that paradox again of both doing outreach and doing inreach. And I love the ideas for outreach that were offered up here. We need to reach beyond our borders because, as Glen Thomas says, there are people out there of all different experiences, of all different backgrounds, who need the saving message of our faith, but who we keep from walking in by the ways that we tell people where we are, who we are, and the ways that we invite people in once they get here. That's a whole conversation that I know you've been engaged in. But the other part of that is the inreach, that we care as much about the people who are already here, the people who in our generations have built our churches. Look what you've done. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But we have to recognize that nobody has just one experience with their congregation or with their religion, that we come in different times of our lives and we need vastly different things. If you came in because you had young kids that you wanted a religious education for, when those kids leave the house, you need another ministry. When you end your career, when you've been a career person all your life, you need another ministry to stay engaged. When you lose your partner or spouse of decades, all of a sudden, you need another ministry. And we don't do that kind of inreach. We don't look for the new ministries that are there within our own walls. And the last thing I will say, as I'm watching the clock, is that we need to be able to hold a space in which we allow there to be strong leadership and also accountability and covenant. Sometimes, because we are a heretical faith, a faith of questioners, we shoot down every person who tries to claim the authority that we need. We are living in a time that there is seismic change around our congregations. And when the Pew Study on Religion just came out, it is showing there is now such a decline in the number of congregations. Congregations are falling by the wayside. And the number of people who are nuns for the first time in that survey is close to the largest category of people who have any religious affiliation, which is evangelical. It is now larger than those who consider themselves mainstream Protestant or Catholic. And if we're going to ride the waves of this time of seismic change, we need to be able to allow strong leaders to lead, and we need to hold them accountable through covenant and through conversation and through deep shared leadership, because the two are not contradictory. They're not contradictory. And those are things that I believe we need to do. I've been privileged to be mentored by many, many people. One of them was the late Reverend Gordon. And he used to tell me when I was a student minister, he told me a couple things. One, he told me never plunge into prayer without a preamble, so I never do that. I never plunge into prayer. But the other thing he told me that I always remember is he said that churches are institutions. And the purpose of an institution is to hold and to keep stuff over the generations. So it is essentially conservative, even the most liberal institutions. So the challenge in our time, I believe, is how to be institutions, but also in our own way, if we're always reinventing things, be institutions that can hold what is sacred while welcoming in the new.
I hear a contradiction, and the contradiction is between the sense of building deep community in a world where the connections are looser. And I want to question both ends of that. David Bumbaugh, one of the professors at Meadville Lombard, once said that something to the effect that the downfall of Unitarian Universalism is that it promises an intimacy that it will not be able to deliver in the congregations that we have, that the kind of knee-to-knee, deep personal sharing turns out not to be something that's easily done in institutions of our size. On the other hand, that is, if you talk to, I've been talking to young adult ministry, what they want is that. They want that community. So I'd like to have some talk about what's the nature of the connections that's possible and how do they work in both the online and offline world. Sue, the thing you said about the loosely connected, a platform through which loosely connected network people relate to each other, is the first new formulation that I've heard in my time of ministry, which has always been about our goal is to build deep community of deep connections, and that's the goal. So thoughts on that? Because I think the reason I ask that, because I think it's crucial for us moving out in Ann Arbor beyond this to how are we going to be connecting to who, and how does that work in this culture?
When I came up in our congregation in Northampton, Massachusetts, I came as a 32-year-old younger person, and I left 10 years later, having been deeply involved, knowing that I was profoundly connected to that congregation. But I was not good friends. I was not intimate friends with anybody in that congregation. I probably would have laid my life down for them. But our connections were loose. But they were deep with affinity, deep with with an awareness of shared values and connection. And I think that those connections did more to populate my world with well-being and to energize me for my own spiritual path and maturity and leadership than anything else. So I actually don't believe that loose connection, first of all, is not intimate, or that loose connection is in any way less powerful for transformation than other kinds of connection. I believe what loose network connections give us is actually the ability to connect to countless more people.
I'm going to add that people get very, very revealing online because it feels safe and they're at home. So the second week that we did online worship was about big questions. And we asked the question, because we always have a time for sharing, what big question are you wrestling with? And we thought people would say, is there life after death? Or is there God? The first person said, why is my husband having an affair? You tell me that you would say that here in Joys and Sorrows. The second person said, why couldn't my mother love me? And immediately, total strangers, able to connect, able to use aliases if need be, able to say things. And we have an app. I'm constantly flabbergasted by what people say to that app. That's why online can augment. That's not going to happen in any bricks and mortar setting. But people are doing that online.
Do we have 1 more minute left?
Yeah.
Okay. And I want to add to that sometimes when we talk about this, one of the answers, of course, is providing lots of nodes, small groups, and places for people to actually touch each other. But I want to add, so that's an obvious thing. But the thing that I want to say is that I think it's really important that in everything we do as a congregation, we live our values, and that we actually make places in our finance committee meetings, in our stewardship drives, to talk about people, to talk in a personal way. Because what we're finding in this generational shift is that the people coming in aren't interested in doing that work unless they get those kinds of connections.
Do we have time?
Yeah, always.
Speaking, I guess heretically, I think the church now more than ever has to be resistant to to anything that would loosen our connections. If we're going to be inside of this sort of building, I think the reason that a community needs to know its voice is because we need people in a nation that needs to be reminded that Black Lives Matter. We need to be a people who are constantly teaching each other how powerful it is when we speak at the same time, with the same words, with the same hopes and aspirations. And so I've always thought, that this needs to be one of those places where connections, deep connections, are nurtured and loved, if for any reason, so that when there is the problem of racial injustice, which there is, and there needs to be a community to respond. And I don't mean to respond online. I mean when there needs to be a body of people in front of City Hall, the church needs to be needs to be the source of those people, and we need to continue to grow that sort of connection that makes us impelled to go out together. And I think the way that we do that is by constantly doing things to practice being together in a more deep way.
Thank you. Go ahead, Tandi.
Can I give an example? Okay, so I have a Facebook obsession. I'm going to come out with that. Thank you. I'm Tandi. I have a Facebook obsession, and I'll tell you why.
Hi, Tandi.
It feels like when I see you. That's my way, my little touch. So whenever I like, it's like I see you when I like a little status. And I look through Facebook to find out what's going on in people's lives. And I see those as little prayers, the comments back and forth. Well, youth ministry is an area that I'm very passionate about, and we just had a big youth conference. And so and also at youth conferences, the youth in my district have a rule that all technology goes away during that YouthCon. But then there's a Facebook group afterwards where we swap stories, and we've got a Twitter feed that we can follow what happened at con that I may have missed, at this workshop and that. And again, they go really deep. They go deeper. It's like they pick up what happened in the face-to-face and then continue going deeper in Facebook. Another piece I want to bring up about social media is it lets us I think it raises cultural competency because it has a potential to expand our horizons. So the people who bullied me in middle school for being suspected of being queer are the same people who liked my Facebook pictures from my wedding. Very different, because they're seeing me as a whole human being. See that? I don't know if you know, during the Boston bombings, Sue, I'm going to brag on you a little bit. Sue created this beautiful a prayer that somebody else on social media picked up and made into a meme. And then it went viral. It went all over. Cocoon Magazine picked it up and put it on their own page. So we have Unitarian Universalism kind of quietly down there, identifying still, but getting the message out there. And that kind of stuff goes out. And here's why it's important. Because there are people out there who will never be Unitarian Universalist because they are committed to their tradition of origin. But just knowing that we are here and welcoming saves them. I hear this over and over and over again.